I've come here to ask for advice because I feel like I'm losing my grip on something that matters a lot to me, my marriage. It's one of those moments where you realize you might have made a mistake, but it's already too late to turn back time. So let me start from the beginning. My husband and I have been together for a while now. We've been married for 5 years, and we're together for 2 years before that, so a total of 7 years in each other's lives. For the sake of privacy, let's call us James and Skylar. I'm 26, and James is 27. We met back when we were in our second year of community college. I was studying office management, and he was working on his business administration degree at a university that offered remote classes through the community college. I can honestly say that, for the most part, our relationship has been amazing. We shared a dream of starting a family together, eventually having 4 kids, ideally 2 boys and 2 girls. Both of our families love us, and I always felt like we were that couple who just got each other, you know? Everything was perfect, or at least it felt that way. But that's the thing. Sometimes we don't even notice when things start shifting until it's too late. And that's exactly what happened to me. I started developing a strange attachment, something that I really didn't see coming. Let me explain. I developed what some people might call a work husband, but in my case, it was with a delivery driver. We'll call him Jaden. He worked for one of the major delivery companies and had been making deliveries to my office for almost 2 years. He was 25 and single, and from the moment we met, I felt something. It wasn't overtly romantic at first, but there was definitely an undeniable chemistry between us. There was this magnetic pull every time he came in. I wasn't the type to fantasize about coworkers or anything like that, but I'd find myself looking forward to his visits. We'd chat for at least 10 minutes every time he made a delivery, and I always made sure I was the one to greet him when it was his turn. It wasn't anything that crossed the line at first, but over time, our conversations started to shift. One day, Jaden pulled me aside. He said he had something personal to ask me, but he didn't want it to interfere with our professional relationship. I figure it was something about work, but he took me off guard when he told me that he was feeling a strong attraction to me. He was a little nervous about asking, but he said that if I wasn't married, he'd ask me out in a heartbeat. I was kind of taken aback, but honestly, I appreciated the compliment. I couldn't lie to myself either. I felt the same spark, but I didn't act on it. I told him that I appreciated his honesty and that it was sweet of him to say that, but we both knew nothing could happen because I was married. That was the end of that, or at least I thought it was. After that conversation, things felt awkward between us for a little while. For about a week, we just made small talk whenever he'd come in for deliveries, and I started to feel this weight on my chest. I felt guilty for even allowing myself to get so close to him. But at home, everything was fine. James and I were living our usual happy married life. Now, let me be clear, I've always been totally satisfied with James. He was an incredible husband, lover, and best friend. I truly believed and still believe that he's perfect for me. But for some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about Jaden. I started wondering if there was a way I could have both my perfect marriage with James and whatever it was I was feeling with Jaden. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's how it started. I wasn't thinking straight. I started looking into things like polyamory and open marriages just out of curiosity, but honestly, the more I read, the more grossed out I felt. It didn't feel right. I knew that James would never be on board with something like that, and I was pretty sure if I ever brought it up, it would ruin everything. So I pushed the thoughts aside. But a couple of weeks later, something changed. One morning, we were lying in bed, scrolling through our phones like we usually do on lazy weekends. I came across a blog post about open marriages. The author talked about how she loved her husband, but also wanted a relationship with another man. She mentioned how she had kept this desire hidden for years until one day, she finally asked her husband about it. To her surprise, he was open to the idea, and they ended up opening their marriage. She said it made their marriage stronger than ever, and they both were happier than they'd ever been. It sounded like the dream scenario to me, and part of me felt guilty for even considering it. So I casually asked James what he thought about open marriages. He immediately crinkled his nose and said it was disgusting. He said that if anyone wanted to sleep around, they should just get divorced. I quickly dropped the subject. I didn't want to push him, especially when he was so clearly against the idea. But then, a couple of weeks later, something happened that shook me to my core. One night, after a particularly intimate evening with James, we were lying in bed, just relaxing. Out of nowhere, he asked, "Who did you have in mind when you brought up open marriages last week?" I was totally caught off guard. I sat up, confused, and asked him what he was talking about. He told me he'd read somewhere that if a woman mentions open relationships, it usually means she's already cheating or has someone else lined up. That hit me like a ton of bricks. He wasn't accusing me of anything, but he could tell something was off. I was shocked. I hadn't cheated on him. Not physically, at least, but I realized I had crossed a line emotionally. I admitted to James that there was someone at work I'd been thinking about, Jaden. I told him about our conversations and what Jaden had said about his feelings for me. But I didn't tell him that I had reciprocated those feelings. I could see the hurt in James's face as I explained everything. He said something that made me freeze. Technically, you've already cheated on me. He didn't mean it in the way you might think, but he was referring to the emotional connection I had with Jaden. I didn't know what to say. I felt like I was going to explode with guilt. James explained what an emotional affair was, and I realized he was right. What I had with Jaden wasn't innocent. I had crossed a line that I hadn't even fully understood until that moment. That night, I couldn't sleep. I spent hours lying awake, trying to process everything. I went downstairs to make myself some tea, but it didn't help. I felt disgusting, dirty, like I had betrayed James in a way I hadn't even realized until now. The next morning, James kissed me goodbye, and I could barely look him in the eye. I kept repeating to myself that I would never cheat on him, but deep down, I knew I had already done so in some way. A few days later, we were lying in bed again, and James surprised me by saying, "I've been thinking about it, and if you really want it, we could try an open marriage." I was floored. Asked him why he was bringing this up now, and he said that he'd thought about everything we discussed and figured we should try it while we were still young, in case it was something we wanted down the line. I didn't know what to think. Part of me was relieved, but another part of me was scared. What if this changed everything? What if this led to something neither of us could control? But I also didn't want to lose James. We talked about ground rules, and James set a few boundaries. The most important one was that we had to tell each other who we were planning to sleep with and when. We also had to share details afterward, no graphic stuff, but enough to make sure we were being honest. I was hesitant but agreed. Then, I suggested a couple more rules, like keeping the open marriage private and promising that our relationships outside of the marriage wouldn't tear us apart. James wasn't on board with these additional rules, and he said no more about it. After that, things got weird between us. I started pulling away from Jaden at work, and for a while, things seemed to return to normal.
But that didn't last.
One day, Jaden mentioned that he missed our conversations, and I found myself thinking about what I had told James, that we had an open marriage. I decided to meet Jaden after work. I wish I could take it back, but I didn't. We met for drinks, and I told him about my marriage and our open arrangement. He didn't hesitate. He said he'd been waiting for me to come around, and that he'd been having dreams about me for months. It felt exciting, like I was doing something rebellious, but also wrong at the same time. We agreed to meet the next day for our first real date, and it happened. But when I got home that evening, I wasn't prepared for what I'd feel. It was 7:30 p.m. when James still hadn't come home. The evening stretched on, and my mind began to race. I had tried calling him multiple times, but each time the phone just went straight to voicemail. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was busy, maybe a meeting ran late, but as the hours passed, I started to worry. I was sitting alone, staring at the food I'd prepared, waiting, feeling increasingly abandoned. The dinner table was set for two, but it felt so empty without him. I sent him a text, trying to keep it lighthearted. "Hey, I'm home. Dinner's ready. Where are you?" But he didn't respond. After another hour went by, I texted again, asking if he was on his way. Still nothing. My anxiety was building. The silence felt heavier with each minute. It was now almost 9 p.m., and I kept replaying every possible scenario in my mind. What could he be doing? Where was he? Why wasn't he answering? By 9:30, I finally got a message from him. "Don't wait up, I'll be home late." That was all. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. He didn't tell me where he was or who he was with, just that I shouldn't wait up. I texted back, asking where he was and who he was with, but once again, no reply. I felt that sinking feeling again, like a knot in my stomach that wouldn't loosen. I had no idea what was going on. Was he with someone else? Why wouldn't he share the details with me? I was too upset to keep sitting there, so I went to bed, trying to push everything out of my mind. Around midnight, I was woken by the sound of water running in the bathroom, and when I got up to investigate, I realized that the door to the guest bathroom was locked. That wasn't like him at all. James never locked doors. I knocked, calling out his name, but there was no answer. The sound of the shower kept going, and it felt like everything in me was holding its breath, waiting. Then, about 10 minutes later, he stepped out of the bathroom with a towel wrapped around his waist. He looked at me like everything was perfectly normal and said, "Hey, how was your night?" I was taken aback. It didn't make sense. I couldn't hold back anymore. Where have you been? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shrugged casually, as if the whole situation wasn't strange at all. Oh, I spent the night at some bars, went dancing. I nodded slowly, but something in me was screaming. Who were you with? I asked, my voice trembling just a little. There was a faint scent of perfume on his discarded clothes, and I didn't know why, but it made me feel nauseous. I wasn't sure if I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't ignore it. He looked at me coldly and said, "Does it matter? We didn't sleep together, so I don't see why I should tell you who it was." He didn't use any expletives, but his tone was so sharp and dismissive that it hit me harder than any insult. I stared at him, completely thrown off. Why the guest bathroom? I asked, my voice softer now, trying to understand. Why not our bathroom? He looked at me like I was being irrational and replied, because I'm staying in the guest bedroom and bathroom until you get tested for STDs. I'm not taking any chances. His words were like ice, piercing through my chest. I froze. I had done everything by the book. I made sure I used protection with Jaden. Why was this happening? This wasn't part of the deal. What? This wasn't part of our agreement. We both agreed on boundaries, I said, my voice cracking. Jaden and I used protection for everything. We were careful. James didn't budge. Have you never heard of oral HPV or oral herpes? I'm not getting within 6 feet of you until you're cleared. You can consider this my version of social distancing. I was devastated. The tears came before I could even stop them, and I tried to hold it together, but my heart was breaking. I had never expected this. James, I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to ruin everything, I whispered. James didn't respond. He just stood there, stone-faced, his indifference like a slap to the face. Then he said something that completely shattered me. You had your turn. Now I'm having mine. I felt numb, like I was floating outside my body, watching everything fall apart. He didn't care. He didn't even seem to care that I was falling apart right in front of him. He told me he needed rest for an early meeting, and without another word, he turned and walked away. I spent the next few hours crying, unable to stop, as I lay curled up on the couch, waiting for sleep to take over. When I finally woke up, the house was silent. James had already left, and the text he'd sent me read, "Don't wait up for me." I tried calling him again, but once again, he didn't pick up. The calls and texts went unanswered all day long. I felt sick. It was like everything in my life was unraveling, and I was powerless to stop it. I couldn't even talk to Jaden, not that I wanted to, but the guilt was eating me alive. I kept wondering if this was it. Had I ruined everything? Had I destroyed my marriage for nothing? At 4:30 p.m., I called Jaden, desperate for some clarity, or maybe just an escape from the painful reality I was facing. We agreed to meet that night. He could tell something was off, and when we got together, I found myself telling him everything. I confessed that I wanted to end our relationship. It was a mistake, I said, and I loved my husband. Jaden didn't argue, but he did ask for one more hookup, which I reluctantly agreed to. The physical encounter was quick, and honestly, it was disappointing. He didn't seem to enjoy it much either, telling me afterward that it was terrible, that I just laid there like a tree trunk. His words stung more than I expected. I apologized and told him it wasn't his fault. This whole thing had been a huge mistake. We said our goodbyes. I gave him a final hug, and as I left, he said something that struck me to my core. "I'll never understand women like you," he said, his voice dripping with judgment. I was confused, hurt, and ashamed, but I didn't ask him to explain. I just drove home, crying the entire way. How could I have been so stupid? I had destroyed my marriage for what? A mistake, a fleeting moment of poor judgment. Now I was paying the price, and it felt like I couldn't stop the downward spiral. When I got home, James didn't come back until 1 a.m. My stomach dropped when I saw his car in the driveway, and I felt the familiar ache in my chest. I had no idea what to do anymore. Our connection was gone. The coldness between us was suffocating. We barely spoke, and when he finally came in, it was like he was a stranger. He took a shower and went straight to bed without a word, as if we were just two people living in the same house, but not really sharing anything anymore. As the months passed, things only got worse. James remained cold and distant, and no matter how much I begged, no matter how much I apologized, it seemed like nothing could heal the damage I had caused. But the truth was, it wasn't just my mistakes that had driven a wedge between us. It was his reaction. The way he shut me out, his refusal to forgive, his cruelty when I needed him most, was something I couldn't move past. I tried everything I could to get us back to where we were. I apologized again and again. I sent messages. I made heartfelt attempts to show him that I was still the same person who loved him. But James didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge me half the time. It became painfully clear that he wasn't going to be the man I once knew. Then came the final breaking point. It was a rainy afternoon when I received a message from James. Just a simple text. "I'm moving out. I don't want to be here anymore." There were no explanations, no further words. My heart sank as I read the message. I immediately called him, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted again, asking him if this was really happening, if he was leaving for good. I should have seen it coming. I should have known that his pride and his resentment toward me had built up so much that there was no coming back. But part of me had held on to hope, had thought maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to rebuild. That night, I stayed up, pacing the house, thinking about everything we had been through, our life together, the good and the bad. The memories that once felt so precious now felt like they belonged to someone else. I never heard from him again. Weeks went by without a word. I found out from a mutual friend that James had moved to Florida to be near his parents, but it wasn't the same man who had left. Something had changed. Something inside him had hardened, and even though I wanted to hate him for how he treated me, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sorrow for him. He never reached out to me after that. Not once. Not even on holidays. Not even when our anniversary rolled around. And that was when I realized James had truly moved on, but not in the way I'd hoped. He had let go of everything that we had, and that was it. The man I once loved, the man I had tried so hard to rebuild my life with, was now just a memory. Months turned into a year, and I didn't hear anything. Then one day, I found out something that shook me to my core. James had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. It was something sudden, something no one expected. As the news spread through our circles, I couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of sadness and guilt. I never expected it to end this way, not for him. But the truth was, as much as I wanted to be there for him, to somehow redeem myself and help him through it, I knew it wasn't my place. I had lost him. He had chosen to live a life without me, and now, even in his final days, he was still pushing me away. James died quietly in the comfort of his parents' home, far away from the life we had shared. I never got the chance to say goodbye, to make amends. And though part of me wanted to feel a sense of closure, the only thing I felt was a deep, painful emptiness. The man I had once known and loved was gone, not because of my mistakes alone, but because of how he chose to handle the hurt I caused. He had given up on everything, not just our marriage, but on the possibility of healing. He let bitterness and pride be the last things he ever held on to. It wasn't the sad ending I had imagined when I first started this journey, but it was the one we both ended up with. I never blamed him for what happened, but I couldn't deny the truth. In the end, he had chosen to be alone, and that loneliness consumed him in a way that I couldn't save him from. Now, as I look back on everything, I realize that sometimes the things we want most are the very things that slip away from us when we least expect it. And sometimes, the people we love most end up leaving us behind, not because we weren't worthy of their love, but because they couldn't let go of their own pain. I'll carry the weight of my mistakes with me forever, but in the end, it was James who had the saddest fate of all. He chose to leave not just me, but the hope for any kind of future we could have shared. His life ended in a quiet, lonely way, and I couldn't help but wonder if, somewhere deep inside, he regretted it too. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit notification bell to stay updated.